All right, today I want to talk about Nav Mesh. Let me get a share screen going here. So we've seen the old system of navigation where we open the navigation window, pull down here. We select we define our agent, we select the different areas. We have our objects that we set to be Nav Mesh static, and we bake it. And here I've gone ahead and set it to I've set it to generate off-mesh links, these little jumpy things. For some reason, the off-mesh links don't work. So if I ask for it to go over here, it doesn't climb the links. I'm not sure why, but doesn't matter. We'll fix this in the other examples. So what I want to do here is load the new Nav Mesh components in. There's a GitHub Unity Tech maintains that has these things. You can download the appropriate version. And these include a number of tools that make the Nav Mesh management system much more versatile and in some ways easier to use. There are two fundamental pieces of any Nav Mesh system. There's the surface and the agent. And we can see the surfaces over here. This is the blue thing that we've baked. And for what it's worth, here in this folder is the Nav Mesh that we've baked here. This is the Nav Mesh in the older system. But I'm going to go to the newer system. Now, things don't look a lot different. There's still a Nav Mesh surface. The difference being that I have an empty game object. It's just something with a transform and a Nav Mesh surface. And this Nav Mesh surface is one of the things that you get with this Nav Mesh, these new Nav Mesh components, a surface. And it's just a script. But with that surface, we can do a lot of interesting things. Now, as I mentioned, there are two ways that we can set things up with our agent. One is you can do the normal thing of opening the navigation window, setting various objects within your world to be navigation static, and bake it. But with the new system, you can have an empty game object to which we've added this Nav Mesh surface component. And we can set its various options and we bake it there. So now on this object, here's where we do the baking. And we have very similar settings here to the navigation window here. But this is different. This is a different system, and it has a lot of strength. So, there are a lot of things you can do with this. In particular, one of the things that we can do is bake the Nav Mesh at runtime. With the old system, you had to pre-bake it, but we can now bake a system at runtime. And this would be really important with procedurally generated worlds, and I'll show you some examples of these. So first of all, a common way of navigating, of driving an AI around a world is with a point and click player. This is from a tutorial here. We in order to use a Nav Mesh agent, we must include Unity Engine AI. In the update function, if we press a mouse button, it casts a ray out from the screen to the mouse position, returns the hit. It sets a marker that we've got out there to move things around. And on the agent, we set its destination. All of which I just said. So very simply here, and you can only see the Nav Mesh if gizmos are turned on, and you have the object selected, that Nav Mesh object selected. Otherwise, one wouldn't be able to see this. It's not a visible object. But now I can go ahead and click various places, and my little agent very nicely navigates to those positions. And as you notice here, he can't get up onto any of these higher regions, even though they have Nav Mesh on them. And that's because we don't have the links. I'll show you more about the links in a second, but here's this same basic setup. Here's the same basic setup. But now I've added a bunch of links to this, and the links are added manually, and I'll go over later showing you how to set them up. But with these links, which now work, they didn't work in the case of the automatically generated ones. This will go over here and find this link up to this level, and we can actually have them, whoops. He's going the long way around because these links are higher cost areas. But notice they are traversable. It's just that it's cheaper from a distance cost point of view to go around than it is to traverse these jumps that have a higher cost. I'll come back and show you that. Well, I'll show it to you now. These links, 5 and 6, have a cost modifier of 10. So that means they're much more expensive to traverse. And so they're avoided. Okay, so we've got that set up. We have a point to click, which we'll use a lot in here. Now, we've talked about a Nav Mesh agent before. The player here is our Nav Mesh agent. This is a standard script that we can add to this from component navigation Nav Mesh agent. The options include things for steering our character around. We can specify its speed and its angular speed, how fast it goes and how fast it turns. Its acceleration, how rapidly it achieves these speeds, stopping distance, and auto braking. There are also settings for how it avoids obstacles. Here we give it a radius, a height, a quality, and a priority. And there are also ones for pathfinding, whether we traverse off mesh links, whether we repath automatically. And there's an area mask, too, for regions that you want to avoid. The obstacle avoidance is an interesting one because it not only deals with how agents avoid obstacles, Nav Mesh obstacles. These are things we can add to objects in our scene, but also how agents interact with other agents. There's the radius and height of the agent, basically the size. Quality is how much processing power we put into handling its interaction with obstacles. And priority is who takes precedence over whom when there's an agent-agent interaction. We'll see that later. So this Nav Mesh obstacle, the Nav Mesh obstacle is something that we get from our pull down here, and Nav Mesh obstacles have a shape, a center, and a size, as well as the carve options. Carving determines whether the obstacles affect the underlying nav mesh. That is, that they would carve out a non-walkable area, for instance, or if they simply are things that AIs bump into, but do not explicitly navigate around them. And the cool thing about obstacles is that they can move. So here's an example of carved obstacles. So these four things are our obstacles. They have little scripts that are going to drive them back and forth. And you can see the carved out region here that the AI is going to avoid as it goes around these things. So if I put this in front here, it knows to go around these things and avoid them. It knows to go around them. If, on the other hand, I don't have the carving turned on, now the nav mesh is not carved out around these obstacles. They are still obstacles, and the nav mesh system still knows about them, but I haven't set the carving. And so, and now in this case, the character doesn't know that it has to go around them. It does avoid them in the sense that it does go around them, but it doesn't have the intelligence to avoid the area that the carved out regions that are generated. With this, we can make things like gates. So here, my Nav Mesh Gate, I've got this gate moving back and forth that's opening and closing these little pathways here. And there it tries to go through it, knows that it can't, heads for the long way around, but the gate opens, it recalculates and goes back. So this thing is pretty smart about knowing, oops, it got through that time. You can see it adapting to the changing nav mesh. Here's gates that are not carved. So with non-carved gates, it no longer knows that it no longer knows that it can get around that. So there you see it getting pushed out of the way. It's still insisting on coming back here, going around this way, and it's getting pushed again. So clearly the carving is important in getting these things to work correctly. I'm going to stop sharing right here, and I will come back in the next one and talk about procedurally generated scenes. And I'm going to stop recording, and I'll see you all in class. Bye.